So how did we get here? The role of the school psychologist prior to 1976 was a consultant for learning and motivational structures. And that goes all the way back to the beginning of the 1900s. It was kind of a tradition. There was an increase in understanding of testing material after World War II, because during World War II they were testing everybody. And they had just developed these new computers so they could crunch data sets on their Army Corps. A lot of school psychologists that I know, in fact, one of my mentors, Dr. Harold Dent, who actually set in the Larry P. court case. He was an Army psychologist in the 50s, but it was coming out of this tradition of the Army providing some of the latest in psychological testing. For those of y'all that may be old enough to remember I Dream of Jeannie, one of the main characters was a psychologist on there for the Air Force. So, anyways, if I'm an I Dream of Jeannie reference, that means I need to move on. After 1976, the refer, test, place model really took hold, and there were a lot of student success teams. At the beginning, they were called student study teams to really focus in on the students' problems from a deficit model, and then towards the 90s, people were talking about them as success teams. And there was still a lot of testing done away in different rooms, the psychologist room, or sometimes even closets. And I've known people who had literally had to clean out the mildew in a janitor's closet with no windows or whatever, but that would be the space that they were provided for their 1 or 2 days a week that they were there at the school site to go ahead and test their student. And that's all some people knew of school psychologists. So if you ask somebody who worked at a school setting, they'd probably say school psychologists only do testing. That's all I've ever seen them do. They go in and out of that old closet. Okay, my first office was a closet within the library that I shared with the librarian. And I really had to put a door, and I tried to make a lock, but the door wouldn't lock when I was doing testing. And she'd come through and she'd like, well, hey, I'm sorry, I just had to grab a book for a student. And then she'd come back through, and it had 2 doors on either side. So for those day-to-day school psychologists, they know what I'm talking about in regards to the understanding of mental health services, and it's kind of that last thought that folk have. I'll just even put in a plug in regard to charter schools, so that some charter schools, some of the challenges that they've had has been implementing student support services, and in particular school psychology services, and thinking through how they're going to provide those services when they're trying to do the best that they can with funding and other pieces. But I know school psychologists who worked in charter schools, and they've had to do public relations to remind folk that if we're looking to change a community, we've got to look to change some of the mindset, but also we have to get to know them, and we have to provide them access. And it's difficult to provide them access when I don't have an office. So most of us who are working school psychologists, we know that it's constant public relations. Okay. So moving on to Goals 2000 in the 1990s, No Child Left Behind in the 2000s, and Race to the Top has been talked about since 2010. And even today, we're hearing very recently that the president has decided to move forward with some of the changes with No Child Left Behind and families' access to high-quality services. And the president before, I think there has been a level of accountability with No Child Left Behind that has targeted populations that we're talking about, children with disabilities, children, and held districts accountable for making sure that students made gains in regards to Latinos, African Americans in particular. And I know No Child Left Behind, they started putting on their website what we're doing from year to year in regards to reading and math progress for students. I would like to see what we're doing from year to year also regarding mental health access for all students, but that's my hope there. All right. Moving on to the next piece now, we're actually wanted out of that closet that I was talking about before. So to look at different systems, database decision-making, accountability, and also leadership. Now, we don't necessarily have leadership classes in some of our school psychology programs, but that's an ongoing theme where we have to provide the leadership when it comes to the ideas about mental health services. There's so many misconceptions or different ideas about what mental health is. There are some professionals that I've worked with who still weren't convinced that ADHD is actually ADHD. or that what really is autism, and what really is this spectrum, and really which kids need this service, which kids we need to push along. We're still that main information source for the mental health piece, but also the laws that govern our practice when it comes to providing those mental health services. So here are some available options that I believe we have. Continue hiding in the closet or be seen about campus. Put out fires or make decisions based on data. Because if you, what I call the walkie-talkie culture, I don't know if you've seen administrators, they're kind of tied into it, which isn't a bad thing to have, that certain level of accountability and availability, but it doesn't lend as much time for reflection and taking a look at data sets. I've seen, at least since I started, administrators becoming more reflective about data and even asking me for what type of data I'm keeping in regards to the services we're providing, and how does that fit within their overall plan. So we're moving more into this area, and we're seen as leaders, whether we feel we're prepared or not. If you went to a NASP approved program, you're prepared. It's a part of what we're doing. Be controlled by administration or support the entire school with the best decision-making information. So we have some of these options here. And I mean, some folks really feel, and especially when a tight budget crunch comes, that they feel like they're being controlled or forced to do certain things. But if you have clear data sets that show this is the priority for our students, you're in a much better position to advocate for them and do what needs to be done. Okay. Going into the improvement cycle. In Long Beach Unified and several other districts throughout the country, school psychologist Dr. Randy Strick, who's developed Safe and Civil School program, he introduced this concept to us in Long Beach Unified, and at the time, one of the lead school psychologists or senior psychologist, Doug Zambita, who's also a past president of CASP, put together an article about school climate and some of the great gains that were made in the school district when it came to this improvement cycle. I had a chance to work there in Long Beach at the same time, and this improvement cycle really shifted my thinking about getting people on board with changes based on data. Okay. And prior to that, I really wasn't that much into data sets. If you're like me, you may have been one of those psychology majors. Every year I ask my psych students to raise their hand if they took psychology to get out of doing math, or they always felt kind of anxiety about math. But then, the stats class comes, and then you really just kind of have to get over it. But I started looking at data sets in regards to the students who we were serving. I wanted to make sure that we were able to get to all of them. And I really couldn't do that without taking a look at data sets. I can kind of feel my way along, but when you got 4,000 students at a school, at a high school at work, or if you're serving up to 4,000 students, 3,000 to 4,000 students, you need to be able to take a look at what your data is telling you about who's coming in for referrals, what are the priorities, about people who are making those referrals. So if I'm starting at the top of gathering and reviewing data, that's some of the basics of what I needed to do. I just needed to know who we were serving. Now, our special ed department was able to provide some of those pieces, but then I had a general education population who we were serving. Even if we were just providing mental health referrals to local agencies for parents, but we never saw the kid, but we still made the referral, we were still addressing some needs within the community. So I wanted to see who's being referred, and whether, at first I just wanted to know by grade level, because it seemed like I was just seeing an inordinate amount of 9th graders, and one year we just had a lot of trouble with our 11th graders. Then I stepped into wanted to know what's going on with boys versus girls, and the types of referrals that are made. Then I wanted to know, well, maybe it's by ethnicity, because I've seen a lot of 2 particular groups, but I haven't seen another group. And so these database decisions can help us when it comes to how we allocate our time for prevention and intervention. So prioritizing the areas of concern, and definitely this is where the real work is, and building some level of consensus, and also looking at what the school's main goals are for the year, or the district's goals, revise whatever current procedures that we have, and moving into adopting a new policy. And this is where you want to build some consensus or let people know there's going to be a shift in how we provide services. I know for the past year or the past 10 years we've been providing services in this way, but based upon the new data sets, we're going to be providing services in a different way. Or